The widow Victoria Reynolds stood in the dusty doorway of the general store in Albuquerque, New Mexico territory, her trembling fingers clutching the thick braid she had just severed from her head, and the proprietor's cold eyes told her that even this sacrifice might not be enough to feed her children through the coming winter of 1878. The weight of the hair felt heavier than it should as she held it out, the dark auburn length still warm from her scalp. She had spent 26 years growing it, washing it in rainwater and apple cider vinegar, braiding it every morning while her husband Thomas was alive. Now Thomas had been dead for 4 months, kicked in the chest by a spooked horse and buried in the small cemetery on the hill outside town, and Victoria was left with 2 young sons and a mortgage on land that would not yield crops without a man to work it properly. The store owner, Mr. Hendricks, took the braid from her hands and examined it in the afternoon light streaming through the window. His fingers ran along its length, testing the texture and quality. Victoria felt naked despite still wearing her bonnet over her shorn head, exposed in a way that had nothing to do with modesty and everything to do with desperation. "I can give you $8, Hendricks said finally, his voice flat and businesslike. "There's a market back east for good hair. Ladies want it for wigs and hairpieces." $8. Victoria calculated quickly in her mind. That would buy flour, cornmeal, a bit of salt pork, maybe some dried beans. It would not pay the mortgage. It would not buy coal for heating. It would keep her boys alive for perhaps 3 weeks if she was careful, and then what would she sell? She had already sold Thomas's guns, his saddle, his tools. The furniture was going piece by piece. Soon there would be nothing left but the bare walls of their small house and the land itself, which the bank was threatening to take. "I will take it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the burning in her throat. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Hendricks counted out the coins with deliberate slowness, stacking them on the counter. Victoria gathered them into her palm, feeling their meager weight, and turned to leave. As she pushed open the door, she nearly collided with a tall figure entering the store. "Pardon me, madam," the man said, removing his hat immediately. Victoria looked up into a lean, weathered face with gray-blue eyes that held genuine apology. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, with worn leather chaps and spurs that jingled softly as he stepped aside to let her pass. Victoria nodded, clutching her coins, and hurried out into the street. She did not see the cowboy turn to watch her go, a slight frown creasing his forehead, nor did she hear him approach the counter where Mr. Hendricks was already wrapping her braid in brown paper. Inside the store, the cowboy, whose name was Caleb Nash, stood studying the package on the counter. He had just returned from a 3-month cattle drive to Colorado, his pockets finally full of honest wages after a long, hard season. He had come to Albuquerque to winter here, to rest and perhaps find work on one of the larger ranches nearby. The woman who had rushed past him had left an impression that puzzled him, something in her eyes that spoke of both determination and despair. "That hair you are wrapping there," Caleb said slowly. "Who did it belong to?" Hendricks looked up, surprised. "That is hardly your concern, Mr. Nash." "I am making it my concern. That lady who just left, did she sell it to you?" "She did. And now I will sell it to a dealer in Santa Fe who will ship it east. That is how commerce works." Hendricks's tone was defensive. Caleb reached for his wallet. "How much do you want for it?" "What?" Hendricks blinked at him. "The hair, how much?" "I gave her $8. I would need to make a profit, so $12. Caleb counted out 12 silver dollars and placed them on the counter with a solid clink. "I am buying it. This is highly irregular." What does a cowboy want with a woman's hair? Hendrix's eyes narrowed with suspicion. That is my business, Caleb said firmly. Now wrap it up properly, if you please. As he left the store with the package under his arm, Caleb was not entirely sure what had driven him to make such an impulsive purchase. He only knew that something about the widow's face had struck him deeply, the way she had held herself with dignity, even in obvious distress. He had seen that look before, on his own mother's face years ago when his father died and left her to raise 3 children alone on a failing farm in Texas. He remembered the day his mother had cut her hair and sold it, and how she had cried quietly that night thinking no one could hear. Caleb made inquiries around town, casual questions that revealed the widow's name and situation. Victoria Reynolds, they told him, whose husband Thomas had died in the summer. Good people, by all accounts. She was trying to hold onto their land south of town, a small homestead with a house and barn, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the bank foreclosed. A woman alone could not manage such a place, especially with 2 young boys to care for. It was a shame, people said, shaking their heads, but that was the way of things. The next morning, Caleb rode out to the Reynolds place. He had spent half the night thinking about what he would say, how he would approach this without seeming like a fool or worse, some opportunist trying to take advantage of a vulnerable woman. The November sky was heavy with clouds threatening rain, and a cold wind blew across the high desert landscape, carrying the scent of pinyon and sagebrush. The Reynolds homestead sat in a small valley with a view of the Sandia Mountains to the east. The house was modest but well built, with a covered porch and real glass windows. The barn needed repairs, he noticed, and the fences were in poor condition. A thin stream of smoke rose from the chimney. As Caleb rode up, 2 boys emerged from the barn, stopping to stare at him with wary eyes. They looked to be about 6 and 8 years old, thin but not yet starving, dressed in patched clothes that were still clean. "Morning," Caleb called out, keeping his voice friendly. "Is your mother home?" The older boy nodded but did not move. The door of the house opened, and Victoria Reynolds stepped out onto the porch. She was wearing the same dress as yesterday, faded blue calico, and a different bonnet that covered her shorn hair. In the morning light, Caleb could see that she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps only 26 or 27, with fine features and dark eyes that held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. "Can I help you?" she asked, one hand resting on the porch railing. Her voice was clear and educated, not the rough drawl of many frontier women. Caleb dismounted and removed his hat. "My name is Caleb Nash, madam. I saw you yesterday at Hendrix's store. I was hoping I might speak with you about a business proposition." "I am not interested in selling my land, if that is why you have come." "No, madam, that is not it at all." Caleb chose his words carefully. "I understand you are managing this place on your own since your husband passed. I am looking for steady work for the winter, and I thought perhaps we might come to an arrangement. I could help with repairs, tend to livestock, work the land come spring, in exchange for room and board and a small wage if you can manage it." Victoria's expression did not change, but her knuckles whitened slightly on the railing. "Mr. Nash, I appreciate the offer, but I cannot afford to hire help. Yesterday I sold my hair for $8. That should tell you the state of my finances." "I know," Caleb said quietly. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the brown paper package. "That is actually the other matter I wanted to discuss." He saw her face go pale as she recognized the package. "What is this?" Her voice had gone cold. "I bought your hair from Hendrix yesterday. I want to give it back to you." Victoria stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you do such a thing?" Because it was not right, Caleb said simply. A woman should not have to sell her hair to feed her children. I do not know what your husband was like, madam, but I imagine he would not have wanted that either. You do not know anything about my husband. Her voice shook now, with anger or emotion. Caleb could not tell which. And you have no right to interfere in my affairs. I do not need your charity or your pity. It is not charity, Caleb said firmly. I am offering honest work for honest pay. As for the hair, consider it a gift if you like, or a loan. When your situation improves, you can pay me back the $12 I spent. $12. You said I only got 8. Hendricks wanted a profit. I paid his price. Victoria came down the porch steps slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. She was trying to read him, to understand his motives, and Caleb let her look. He had nothing to hide. When she reached him, she took the package from his hands, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father died when I was 10, Caleb said. Left my mother with 3 children and a farm that was more dust than crops. I watched her work herself near to death trying to keep us fed. I watched her sell everything she had, including her hair. By the time I was old enough to help properly, she was worn down to nothing. She died when I was 17, and I have always believed she might have lived longer if someone had helped her when she needed it most." He paused, then added, "I cannot change what happened to my mother, but I can help you if you will let me." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I cannot pay you much. I have the $8 from yesterday, but I need that for food. Keep it. I have money from the cattle drive. What I need is a place to stay for the winter that is not the boarding house in town. What you need is someone to help keep this place running. Seems to me we can help each other." "People will talk," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. "Let them talk. We will know the truth of it." Victoria looked at her sons, who were still watching from near the barn, then back at Caleb. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, pride fighting with necessity, fear fighting with hope. Finally, she nodded, a quick, sharp movement. "You can sleep in the barn. It is dry and there is a stove out there. I will provide meals. As for wages, I can give you $1 a week once I have caught up on some debts. That is fair. And Mr. Nash, if you prove to be anything other than what you say you are, I have my husband's rifle and I know how to use it." "I would expect nothing less, madam." That first day, Caleb set about examining the property and making a list of repairs in his mind. The barn roof needed patching before the winter rains came in earnest. The chicken coop had holes that would let in predators. The plow needed mending. The fence lines were a disaster. But the land itself was good, with a decent well and a small creek running through the property. With work, it could be prosperous again. Victoria's sons, James and Michael, were shy at first, watching Caleb with the same wary caution as their mother. But as the day wore on, and they saw him working steadily on the barn roof, their curiosity overcame their fear. By afternoon, they were handing him tools and asking questions about where he had been and what he had seen. Caleb answered patiently, aware that Victoria was watching from the house, judging whether he could be trusted around her children. For dinner that evening, Victoria brought a pot of stew out to the barn where Caleb had set up his bedroll in the loft. It was a humble meal, mostly beans and vegetables with a little bit of pork, but it was well seasoned and hot. "You do not have to serve me out here," Caleb said. "I can come to the house for meals." "This is more proper," Victoria said stiffly, "at least until we know each other better." "As you wish, madam." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Nash, about the hair, I do not know what to do with it now. It is yours, do whatever you like. But I already spent the money from it." "Then consider my $12 the price of your dignity," Caleb said. Some things are not meant to be bought and sold. Victoria met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something soften in her expression. "Thank you," she said quietly, and then she was gone. The days fell into a rhythm. Caleb woke before dawn and worked until dark, repairing everything that was broken or worn. He patched the barn roof and reinforced the chicken coop. He mended the plow and fixed the broken fence posts. He chopped wood until there was a substantial pile stacked against the side of the house. Victoria watched him work with an expression that slowly changed from suspicion to something that might have been relief. She was not idle either. He saw her tending the chickens, working in the small kitchen garden, cooking and cleaning and caring for her boys. She moved through her days with quiet efficiency, but he could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight she carried. On the third evening, Victoria invited him to eat supper at the table with the family, instead of taking his meal in the barn. It was a small gesture, but Caleb understood its significance. She was beginning to trust him. "Mr. Nash," young James asked over the meal, "did you really drive cattle all the way to Colorado?" "I did. 2,000 head from South Texas all the way up to Denver." "Were there Indians?" Michael asked, his eyes wide. "A few, mostly peaceful though. They were more interested in trading than fighting." "My papa said cowboys were tough," James said. "He said they could ride all day and all night. Your papa was right. It is hard work, but honest work." Victoria was quiet, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb noticed she barely touched her food, as if she was making sure there was enough for everyone else first. After the boys went to bed, Victoria and Caleb sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. The clouds had finally broken that afternoon, bringing a cold rain that left everything smelling of wet earth and sage. "You are good with the boys," Victoria said softly. "They have not smiled much since their father died. They are good boys. You have raised them well. I am trying. Some days I am not sure it is enough. It is more than enough. They are loved. That matters most." Victoria was silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you have a family, Mr. Nash? A wife somewhere wondering where you are?" "No wife. No family. My brothers both died years ago, one in the war and one of fever. It has just been me for a long time now." "That must be lonely." "It has been," Caleb admitted. "But a cowboy's life does not leave much room for roots, always moving, following the herds, going where the work is." "Is that what you want? To keep moving?" Caleb looked out at the dark landscape, considering the question. "I used to think so. Lately I have been wondering if there might be something else, something more permanent." He could feel Victoria's eyes on him, but he did not turn to meet her gaze. It was too soon for that kind of honesty, too soon to acknowledge what he had begun to feel. He had known her less than a week, but something about her had reached into his chest and taken hold. It was not just her beauty, though she was beautiful even with her shorn hair hidden beneath her bonnet. It was her strength, her dignity, the fierce love she had for her children. It was the way she kept going even when everything seemed impossible. 2 weeks passed. Caleb worked the land and made repairs while Victoria managed the household. They fell into an easy partnership, the kind that comes when two capable people respect each other's skills. The boys began following Caleb around like puppies, eager to learn everything he could teach them about horses and tools and the work of keeping a homestead running. Victoria stopped wearing her bonnet around the house, revealing the short, uneven cut of her remaining hair. Caleb thought she was more beautiful than ever, though he kept that observation to himself. One afternoon, Caleb rode into town for supplies, taking the list Victoria had given him along with the precious few dollars she could spare. At the general store, he encountered Mr. Hendricks again, who gave him a knowing look. "I hear you are staying out at the Reynolds place," Hendricks said, his tone implying more than his words. I am working there, Caleb said flatly. Nothing more. Of course, of course. Still, people talk. A widow and a single man under the same roof, more or less. The widow is employing me to maintain her property. There is nothing improper about it. I am not saying there is, Hendricks said quickly, though his expression suggested otherwise. Just passing along what folks are saying. Caleb paid for the supplies and left without another word, but the conversation bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Not because he cared what the town gossips thought, but because he knew such talk could harm Victoria's reputation. A woman alone was vulnerable in more ways than one, and even innocent associations could be twisted into something ugly. When he returned to the homestead, he found Victoria in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour as she kneaded bread dough. The domestic scene stirred something in his chest, a longing he had thought he had buried years ago. People in town are talking, he said without preamble. Victoria's hands stilled. About us. About you having a man staying on your property. Hendricks made a point of mentioning it. I see. Her voice was carefully neutral. I do not want to cause problems for you. If my being here is going to hurt your standing in the community, I can leave. No. The word came out sharp and immediate. Victoria looked up, meeting his eyes directly. No, you are not leaving. I need your help, and I do not care what a bunch of gossiping fools think. Let them talk. Are you sure? I am sure. She went back to kneading the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. Mr. Nash, I have learned something these past 4 months. People will judge you no matter what you do. If I had stayed in town after Thomas died, they would have judged me for not being able to keep the homestead. When I tried to keep it, they judged me for being too proud. When I sold my hair, they whispered about it. If you leave now because of gossip, they will say I drove you away or that something improper happened. There is no winning with people like that. You are right, Caleb said, but I want you to know that I would never do anything to damage your reputation. Your honor is safe with me. Victoria's expression softened. I know that, Mr. Nash. If I did not trust you, you would not be here. That evening, a cold snap moved in from the mountains, bringing temperatures low enough to leave frost on the windows by morning. Caleb woke in the barn to find his breath misting in the air and the water in his washing bucket frozen solid. He dressed quickly and went to check on the animals, making sure the horses and chickens were secure against the cold. When he walked to the house for breakfast, he found Victoria already up, stoking the fire in the kitchen stove. She looked tired, and he wondered if she had slept at all. The boys are still asleep, she said quietly. They were up late last night. Michael was coughing. Is he sick? I hope not. Just a cold, I think, but with winter coming on. She did not need to finish the sentence. They both knew how quickly a simple cold could turn into something worse, especially for children. I will ride into town today and get some medicine. There is a doctor there, right? Dr. Morrison, but I cannot afford his fees. Let me worry about that, Mr. Nash. You have already done too much. I cannot accept any more of your charity. It is not charity, Caleb said firmly. Those boys have worked hard helping me with the repairs. Consider it payment for their labor. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but another round of coughing from the boys' bedroom stopped her. All right, she said quietly. Thank you. Caleb rode into Albuquerque and found Dr. Morrison at his office near the plaza. The doctor was a gray-haired man in his 50s, with kind eyes and steady hands. He listened to Caleb's description of Michael's symptoms and prepared a bottle of medicine, along with some advice on care. The widow Reynolds has had a hard time of it, the doctor said as he wrapped the bottle carefully. Good woman, though. She was a school teacher before she married Thomas, you know, educated back east. I did not know that, Caleb said, filing away this new piece of information about Victoria. Thomas was a good man too. Bad luck, what happened, but I hear she has help now, which is good. The doctor's eyes were shrewd but not unkind. Do not let the gossips get to you, son. Some folks have nothing better to do than wag their tongues. Caleb paid for the medicine and rode back to the homestead. Michael's cough did improve with the doctor's tonic, and within a few days, he was back to his normal, energetic self. But the scare had shaken something loose between Caleb and Victoria. They had moved from employer and employee to something more like partners, working together to protect the boys and the homestead against the coming winter. December arrived with bitter cold and several inches of snow. Caleb spent his days ensuring the animals were cared for and the wood pile remained stocked. Victoria kept the house warm and the meals coming, though he could tell she was stretching every ingredient as far as it would go. The $8 from her hair was long gone, spent on necessities. Caleb had been giving her most of his remaining money from the cattle drive, claiming he had expenses in town that required cash, though in truth he simply gave the money to her under false pretenses, so she would accept it. Christmas approached, and Caleb found himself thinking about his childhood, about the last Christmas his family had celebrated together before everything fell apart. His mother had made cookies despite having little flour, and his father had carved wooden toys for the children. It had been a happy time, though touched with the hardship that would eventually destroy them. On Christmas Eve, Caleb went into town one more time. He spent the last of his savings carefully, buying small gifts for the boys, some real coffee for Victoria, and a few extra supplies. He also stopped by a dressmaker's shop where he inquired about hairpieces. "I need something made," he told the dressmaker, a French woman named Madame Rousseau who had moved to New Mexico from New Orleans. "Something special." He showed her the braid he had bought back from Hendricks, which he had kept wrapped carefully in his saddlebag all this time. Madame Rousseau examined it with a professional eye. "This is fine hair," she said. "Very good quality. What did you have in mind?" "Can you make it into something she could wear? Something to cover her short hair until it grows back," Madame Rousseau smiled. "I can make a beautiful hairpiece. It will take me a few days, though, perhaps by the end of the week. That would be perfect." Caleb paid her, grateful that she asked no questions about his relationship to the hare's owner. That Christmas Eve, Victoria made a simple supper of roast chicken and vegetables, a feast by their recent standards. The boys were excited, their eyes bright with the anticipation of Christmas morning. Caleb had told them he had a small surprise, which had set off rounds of speculation about what it might be. After the boys went to bed, Caleb and Victoria sat by the fireplace, listening to the wind howl outside. The house was warm and cozy, a sharp contrast to the frozen landscape beyond the walls. "I have not properly thanked you," Victoria said suddenly, "for everything you have done. You saved us, Mr. Nash. Without your help, I do not know what would have happened to us." "You would have found a way," Caleb said. "You are stronger than you think, perhaps, but I am glad I did not have to do it alone." She paused, then added, "I have not felt this safe since Thomas died. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to rely on." "You can rely on me," Caleb said, the words carrying more weight than he had intended. "For as long as you need." Victoria turned to look at him, the firelight casting warm shadows across her face. Her short hair had begun to grow back, soft and dark like feathers around her face. "What about when winter ends? Will you move on to the next job, the next cattle drive?" "I have been thinking about that," Caleb admitted. "About what I want." "And what do you want?" The question hung in the air between them. Caleb could feel his heart beating faster. It was too soon, he told himself. She was still grieving her husband. She needed security, not romantic declarations from a drifter cowboy. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made him think perhaps it was not too soon after all. "I want to stay," he said quietly. "If you will have me, not as a hired hand but as something more permanent." "What are you saying, Mr. Nash?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Victoria. I know it is fast, and I know you may not feel the same way, but I cannot keep pretending that I am just working here. I care about you and your boys. I want to help you keep this land, not as an employee but as a partner, as a husband if you would consider such a thing." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Caleb, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know how I feel." "I cared for Thomas," Victoria said slowly. "I loved him, but our marriage was practical more than passionate. He was a good man, a kind man, but we married because it made sense, not because we could not live without each other." She wiped at her eyes. "These past weeks with you have been different. I find myself watching for you in the mornings. I find myself wanting to talk to you about everything. I find myself feeling things I did not feel even in my marriage." "Victoria," Caleb said, his voice rough. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of losing someone again, afraid of making a mistake, afraid that this feeling is just gratitude or desperation." "It is not desperation, and if you are afraid, we can wait. I am not going anywhere." Victoria reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and small in his. "The truth is, I think I have fallen in love with you too. I have been fighting it, telling myself it is too soon, that I should wait a proper mourning period. But the heart does not care about propriety, does it? No, it does not." "Then yes, Caleb Nash, I will marry you." "But can we wait until spring? I want to do this properly. I want the boys to adjust to the idea. I want us to be sure." "We can wait as long as you need," Caleb said, though his heart was soaring. "I will be here." They sat holding hands until the fire burned low, talking quietly about their plans and hopes. It was the most honest conversation Caleb had ever had with another person, and when they finally said good night and went to their separate beds, he felt more at peace than he had in years. Christmas morning brought joy and laughter. The boys were thrilled with their small gifts, wooden horses that Caleb had carved himself during the long evenings in the barn. Victoria exclaimed over the coffee, and Caleb could see genuine happiness in her eyes. A few days later, Caleb retrieved the hairpiece from Madame Rousseau. The dressmaker had done beautiful work, creating an elegant piece that looked natural and could be pinned into Victoria's short hair. When Caleb presented it to Victoria that evening, she stared at it in wonder. "You had this made from my hair. I wanted you to have it back properly this time. You should not have had to sell it in the first place." Victoria's hands shook as she touched the hairpiece. "How much did this cost?" "It does not matter." "Caleb, you have spent all your money on us." "I have spent it on my family," Caleb corrected gently. "On my future. And I cannot think of a better investment." Victoria threw her arms around him then, hugging him tightly. Caleb held her, feeling the rightness of it, the way she fit perfectly against him. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I do not deserve you," she said. "You deserve everything good in this world." Winter continued its cold grip on New Mexico territory, but inside the Reynolds homestead there was warmth and growing love. Caleb and Victoria were careful around the boys, not wanting to confuse them, but James and Michael seemed to sense the change between the adults. They started calling Caleb by his first name instead of Mr. Nash, and they began including him in their plans and conversations as if he had always been part of the family. In January, Caleb rode to the bank in Albuquerque and spoke with the manager about the mortgage on the Reynolds land. The amount owed was substantial, but Caleb had a plan. He offered to pay off a portion of it immediately with the last of his savings, and he negotiated an extension on the rest based on his promise to work the land come spring. The bank manager, impressed by Caleb's determination and reputation as an honest worker, agreed to the terms. When Caleb told Victoria what he had done, she was both grateful and dismayed. "You spent your money to save my land." "Our land," Caleb corrected. "If we are going to be married, then it is our land, our debt, our future. We are in this together." "But what if something goes wrong? What if the harvest fails or the cattle get sick? You will have nothing left. Then we will start over." "But we will start over together, and that makes all the difference." February brought a thaw, and with it the first hints of spring. The snow melted into the earth, nourishing it for the growing season ahead. Caleb began planning what crops to plant, consulting with Victoria about what had worked in previous years. They spent evenings poring over seed catalogs, discussing everything from potatoes to wheat to corn. The boys listened to these conversations with interest, excited about the idea of helping with the planting. In March, the wildflowers began to bloom across the high desert, splashes of color against the brown and gray landscape. Victoria's hair had grown back enough that she no longer needed to cover it constantly. Though she treasured the hairpiece Caleb had given her and wore it on special occasions. She had begun to smile more easily, to laugh at small things, and Caleb thought she had never been more beautiful. On a warm afternoon in early April, Caleb rode into town and spoke with the local minister, a kind man named Reverend Patterson who served the small church in Albuquerque. Caleb explained his situation and his intentions, and the Reverend agreed to perform the wedding ceremony. "I am glad to see the widow Reynolds finding happiness again," Reverend Patterson said. "She has been through much, and you seem like a good man, Mr. Nash. I will do my best to take care of her and the boys. That is all any of us can promise." When Caleb returned to the homestead, he found Victoria in the garden, planting the first of the spring vegetables. Her hands were dirty and her face was flushed from the sun, and she looked up at him with such warmth in her eyes that his breath caught. "I spoke with the minister," he said, dismounting. "He will marry us whenever we are ready." Victoria stood, brushing the dirt from her skirts. "How about next Saturday? So soon? We have waited long enough, do you not think? The boys are happy. The land is saved. Spring is here. What are we waiting for?" "Nothing," Caleb said, grinning. "Nothing at all." That evening they told James and Michael about the upcoming wedding. The boys reacted with enthusiasm, asking a dozen questions about what would happen and whether they could be part of the ceremony. Victoria assured them they would have important roles, which satisfied them greatly. The next few days were a flurry of preparation. Victoria cleaned the house from top to bottom and made a new dress from fabric Caleb had bought her. Caleb chopped wood and made repairs to ensure everything was perfect. They invited a few neighbors and some of the people from town who had been kind to Victoria after Thomas's death. It would be a small ceremony, but it would be theirs. On Saturday morning, Caleb dressed in his best clothes, a clean shirt and his good jacket, and rode into town with Victoria and the boys in the wagon. The church was small but well kept, with spring flowers decorating the pews. The guests gathered, perhaps 20 people in all, their faces reflecting genuine happiness for the couple. Victoria wore her new dress, a simple but elegant creation in soft blue, and the hairpiece Caleb had given her. She looked radiant, her dark eyes bright with emotion. James and Michael stood beside them, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best, their faces serious with the importance of the occasion. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When it came time for the vows, Caleb took Victoria's hands in his and spoke from his heart. "I promise to love you and care for you all the days of my life. I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to your sons. I promise to work hard and to always be honest with you. I promise that you will never have to face hardship alone again." Victoria's voice was steady as she replied, though tears streamed down her face. "I promise to love you and support you. I promise to be a true partner in all things. I promise to trust you and to build a life with you. I promise that you will always have a home with us, a family to come back to, a place where you belong." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Victoria gently, mindful of their audience but unable to hide his joy. The small congregation applauded and James and Michael cheered, and for that moment, everything was perfect. There was a small reception at the church hall, with food brought by the neighbors and music from a fiddle player. Caleb and Victoria danced together, awkward at first and then more confidently, laughing at their missteps. The boys danced too, spinning around the floor with boundless energy. Even some of the town gossips who had whispered about the impropriety of Caleb staying at the homestead seemed mollified now that everything had been made respectable through marriage. As the sun began to set, the Nash family, as they were now known, rode back to their homestead. The boys fell asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. Caleb drove with one hand, his other arm around Victoria's shoulders, holding her close. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I have been in a very long time," Victoria replied. "Happier than I thought I could be again." "Good. That is all I want, to make you happy." "You already have, Caleb. You gave me back my dignity when I sold my hair. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought that part of my life was over. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," Caleb said. "That is what marriage is, building something together." That night, after the boys were tucked into bed, Caleb and Victoria sat on their porch under the stars, just as they had done so many evenings before. But everything was different now. They were husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. "I love you," Victoria said, leaning against him. "I love you too," Caleb replied, kissing the top of her head. Spring turned to summer and the Nash family worked the land together. Caleb planted crops while Victoria managed the household, and the boys helped with whatever tasks they could manage. The harvest that year was good, enough to pay down more of the mortgage and to save a little for the following year. The homestead began to prosper, slowly but steadily, just as their family was prospering. In the fall, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening as they were finishing the day's work, her eyes reflecting both joy and nervousness. Caleb swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, his heart full to overflowing. "Are you pleased?" Victoria asked, laughing. "Pleased? I am thrilled. A baby, Victoria, our baby. The boys will have a little brother or sister. This family keeps getting better and better." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria bloomed with health and happiness. The boys were excited about the prospect of a new sibling, already arguing about whether they wanted a brother or sister and what names would be best. Caleb found himself thinking constantly about the future, about the family they were building, about the legacy they would leave. In the winter of their second year together, on a cold January night, Victoria went into labor. Dr. Morrison came from town, arriving with plenty of time to help with the delivery. Caleb paced outside the bedroom, listening to Victoria's labored breathing, feeling helpless and terrified. James and Michael stayed with a neighbor, spared from the anxiety of waiting. After several hours, the baby's cry filled the house, strong and healthy. Dr. Morrison emerged from the bedroom with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Nash, and your wife came through beautifully." Caleb rushed into the bedroom to find Victoria propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, his face red from crying. "He is perfect," Caleb whispered. "We are naming him Thomas," Victoria said. "After my first husband, he should be honored too for the good he did." "Thomas Nash," Caleb said, testing the name. "It is a good, strong name." He sat on the edge of the bed, and Victoria placed the baby in his arms. Caleb held his son carefully, marveling at how small he was, how fragile, how completely dependent. In that moment, holding his child with his wife beside him and his stepson sleeping safely in the next room, Caleb felt a completeness he had never experienced before. "Thank you," he said to Victoria, his voice rough with emotion. "For what? For giving me this. A family, a home, a purpose. I spent so many years drifting, never belonging anywhere. And then I saw you in that general store and everything changed." "It was meant to be," Victoria said softly. "All of it, even the hard parts, they led us to each other." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and growing love. The homestead continued to prosper under Caleb's hard work and Victoria's shrewd management. The mortgage was eventually paid off entirely, and they even expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land from a neighbor who was moving back east. James and Michael grew into capable young men, learning ranching and farming from their stepfather, who they had long since begun calling Pa without even thinking about it. Little Thomas was followed by 2 more children, a daughter they named Grace, and another son they called William. The house that had once seemed too large for Victoria, and her 2 boys now rang with the voices of 5 children, filled with laughter and occasional arguments, and all the chaos of a large, loving family. Victoria's hair grew back completely over the years, long and lustrous again, but she kept the hairpiece Caleb had made from her original braid in a special box in her dresser. Sometimes she would take it out and look at it, remembering that desperate time when she had been willing to sell her hair to feed her children, and how a stranger with kind eyes had given her back not just her hair but her whole life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Victoria stood on their porch in the evening, watching the sunset paint the Sandia Mountains in shades of gold and pink. Their children were playing in the yard, their voices carrying on the warm spring air. The land stretched out before them, green with growing crops and dotted with healthy cattle. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked, leaning into her husband's embrace. "When you saw me in that store that day, did you imagine we would end up here?" "I did not let myself imagine anything," Caleb admitted. "I just knew I had to help you, but I think some part of me hoped, even then. When I looked at you, I saw strength and beauty and everything I had been looking for without knowing I was looking." "I was so angry when you bought my hair back," Victoria said with a laugh. "I thought you were either crazy or trying to take advantage of me." "I was crazy, crazy in love from almost the first moment." "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Caleb agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I still think about that day sometimes, how close I came to losing everything. If you had not come along when you did, if you had not cared enough to help a stranger, where would my boys and I be now? You would have found a way. You were never as helpless as you thought. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad you were there. I am glad you stayed." "I will always stay," Caleb promised, kissing her temple. "This is my home. You are my home." As the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play, listening to the peaceful sounds of their ranch. The widow who had once sold her hair in desperation was now a prosperous rancher's wife with a house full of love and children. The drifting cowboy who had once thought he would never settle down was now a devoted husband and father with roots deep in the New Mexico soil. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold over the years. The braid in its special box was passed down eventually to their daughter Grace, who kept it as a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that strangers can become family, and that love can appear when you least expect it and change everything. James and Michael grew up and started families of their own, building houses on the Nash land and working it alongside their father and younger siblings. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Thomas, Grace, and William all found their own paths in life, but they always came home, drawn back by the love and security their parents had created. Caleb and Victoria grew old together, their hair turning gray and their faces creasing with lines earned from years of laughter and hard work under the New Mexico sun. They were fixtures in Albuquerque society, respected for their integrity and their generosity to those in need. They never forgot what it was like to struggle, and they made sure to help others who found themselves in desperate situations, offering work, food, or simple kindness as needed. On quiet evenings, they would still sit on their porch and talk, remembering their early days together, marveling at how far they had come. Caleb would sometimes tease Victoria about being so stubborn when they first met, and she would remind him that he had been presumptuous to buy her hair without asking. But it was always said with love, with the deep affection of two people who had built a life together through both hardship and joy. In their later years, when their children were grown and their grandchildren were running through the same yards where James and Michael had once played, Caleb and Victoria would often reflect on the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together. A woman's desperation, a man's compassion, a braid of hair that became a symbol of something deeper than either of them had understood at the time. "You have any regrets?" Victoria asked Caleb one evening, when they were both well into their 60s and the grandchildren had just left after a Sunday dinner. "Not a single one," Caleb said firmly. "Every choice I made led me to you, so how could I regret any of it, even the hard years, the struggles, especially those? They taught us what we were capable of. They brought us closer together. Would I trade them for an easier path? Never. This life, our life, is exactly what I wanted. More than I wanted, if I am being honest. I love you, Caleb Nash. After all these years, I love you more than ever. And I love you, Victoria Nash, my brave, beautiful wife who was willing to sell her hair to save her children. The strongest woman I have ever known." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had done countless times over the decades, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar colors. The homestead that Victoria had nearly lost was now a thriving ranch that would be passed down through generations. The children she had struggled to feed were now adults with children and grandchildren of their own. The future that had once seemed so bleak was now secure and bright. As the evening star appeared in the darkening sky, Caleb squeezed Victoria's hand gently. She squeezed back, and they smiled at each other with the easy intimacy of two people who had spent a lifetime together and still found joy in each other's presence. They had built something lasting, something good, something that would endure long after they were gone. The story of the widow who sold her hair and the cowboy who bought it back became part of the Nash family's heritage, told to each new generation as an example of how love can emerge from hardship, how strangers can become family, and how a simple act of kindness can change the course of multiple lives. The braid itself, carefully preserved, remained a treasured family heirloom, a physical reminder of the day their family truly began. In the end, it was not really about the hair at all. It was about recognizing another person's pain and choosing to help. It was about accepting that help with grace despite pride. It was about two lonely people finding each other at exactly the right moment and having the courage to build something beautiful together. It was about love, in all its messy, complicated, wonderful forms. And as Caleb and Victoria sat together on that porch, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, the land they had worked together, the family they had raised together, they knew that they had been blessed beyond measure. Not because life had been easy, but because they had faced its challenges side by side, as partners, as lovers, as friends. The sun set completely, leaving them in the gentle darkness of a New Mexico evening, still holding hands, still together, still in love. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. They had found each other, chosen each other, and built a life together that would echo through generations. The widow had sold her hair, the cowboy had bought it back, and in doing so they had given each other everything that truly mattered: love, family, home, and a future bright with promise.